Hello everybody, Gamer Ben here. Today we're counting down the 5 most successful villains in film TV history. Okay, so in terms of reference then, most successful doesn't actually mean the most evil. It means that they were the most successful in terms of actually achieving their plan or being able to do what they set out to do. So there may be even more evil villains than them around in film history. I'm sure there are. But these guys, for me, are the most successful in achieving what they wanted. So, starting off with number 5, we've got Thanos from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Firstly, Thanos managed to wipe out half the population due to his mastery of the Infinity Stones. Now, some argue his ambition wasn't purely to kill, but a warped way of saving those who remained from the overpopulation problem. So, obviously, he thought that overpopulation was an issue. He'd seen it on his own world, and he tried to solve that issue by wiping out half the population, as you do. Sort of like a sort of psycho David Attenborough. So I've ranked him 5th. Plus his efforts didn't particularly last very long. As you may know, as I'm sure you do know, in the next film they're able to reverse a lot of what he did. So ultimately he wasn't that successful, but for a short period of time he did what he needed to do. So I've ranked Thanos 5th in this sense. 4th, we've got Davros. He was the creator of the Daleks. Obviously the Daleks are responsible for thousands of deaths across time and space as a result. He was an evil Khaled scientist who survived so many tussles with the Doctor. Okay, so many times the Doctor thought he'd bested him and Davros was finally dead. But shock horror, Davros reappears. He always manages to find his way out of a scrape. He's a master tactician, but I've only put him 4th on the list as he has been defeated, even temporarily, many times. So he's been successful multiple times in terms of his ability to kill, but his plans tend to go awry. The Doctor tends to foil them. His greatest enemy, the Doctor, manages to foil his plans on multiple occasions. So I put him 4th on the list because he's killed thousands over his time. But ultimately the Doctor's managed to stop him many times as well. Now we're really getting to the business end of villains. 3rd place, Tom Marvolo Riddle, aka Lord Voldemort from the Harry Potter series, the Wizarding World, let's say the Wizarding World, managed to cover the entire Wizarding World in total darkness twice. Pure fear was the way he kept his supporters in line, and his ability to cheat death, almost become immortal, many times through his Horcruxes was inspired. You know, he created those 7 Horcruxes that effectively meant he couldn't be destroyed unless those 7 Horcruxes were destroyed. Now, there's been a lot of debate about why he chose those 7 items. He could have just picked 7 random items instead, and it'd probably given him a much better chance of surviving the series. But ultimately, he's a true villain. He's motivated by racism that believes pure magical blood should be dominant. Even as a child, Riddle was a purely repulsive individual who took great joy in hurting those around him, even killing his parents. Goodness knows how many have died at his hand or by his cultish Death Eater followers. So that's why I put Voldemort in 3rd place. He was really successful for a period of time in achieving what he set out to do, which was to inspire fear in the Wizarding World. He didn't quite get what he wanted in the sense of a full-scale wipeout or enslavement of those of non-magical folk, but he came very close in Book 7 and Films 7 and 8 to doing that. He took over the Ministry of Magic through appointing a puppet leader and was very successful in doing what he set out to do. So that's why I put him 3rd. 2nd, we've got the Dark Lord Sauron. He's 2nd on the list for obvious reasons. The primary villain in Tolkien's works, save Morgoth, who was Sauron's original master, but we're talking particularly film here, so I won't go too much depth on that. He was able to dominate Middle-earth for centuries, and he had a second crack at it in The Lord of the Rings. He was able to bring together all sorts of followers, orcs, trolls, men, a wizard in Saruman, beasts and wraiths, Ultimately, if it wasn't for Frodo and Sam, hobbits, simple folk, it would have been successful a second time and cast Middle-earth into total ruin and shadow. Thousands died at his hand, or by those in his service. Incredibly, I've put him second on the list, despite the fact that actually in the films, apart from in the prologue, he doesn't appear at all, other than the representation of him as an eye at the top of Barad-dûr Tower. So that is incredible, that the second ranking villain in terms of success hardly appears in the films that we're talking about. That takes some skill. Okay, so I'm really, really pleased to put him second, because I think he deserves that place. He was ultimately very successful in what he did in the Second Age, when he was defeated eventually by the Last Alliance. And he was almost successful again in the Third Age, and numerous times in between, because there's a lot of things that were covered in the books in some detail about what happened between the Second and Third Ages, where he almost came back again, particularly as the Necromancer. So there's a lot to cover there, but Sauron deserves that second place spot. Now it's time for the grand reveal. First place, most evil, well, not most successful villain of all in film and TV history, Jar Jar Binks. I'm joking, obviously. It isn't Jar Jar Binks. It's Chief Palpatine, Darth Sidious, or the Emperor, depending on what he wants to go by. Obviously, I've put him here because he was. I know people always rant and rave about Darth Vader being the greatest villain in film history, with some justification because he's the most recognised. But it was Sidious, Palpatine, who was ultimately the one that spent decades planning to achieve domination of an entire galaxy. And he was successful for a huge period of time. He was a true master tactician who orchestrated the Clone Wars to ensure no matter what happened, he won. So he was in charge of both the Separatists and the Republic forces in the Clone Wars. So no matter what side was victorious, he won. He was the puppet master in so much of the Star Wars franchise. He even had plans for after his death, such as Operation Cinder, which was detailed in Star Wars Battlefront 2 game. I'm not going to talk about Episode 9, don't worry, or the sequels at all in this. But obviously to say, even if you were to consider that, he was very, very successful in what he did. Working in the background, Palpatine was able to quietly build the greatest project in history and achieve so much. His success was in the planning and orchestration of Order 66, that wiped out all but a handful of Jedi and covered the galaxy in total darkness for several decades. That puts him at number 1 on the list. He was the man who basically organised and facilitated the takeover of a republic that stood for thousands of years, and without doubt the most successful villain in film history, in my humble but honest opinion. But anyway, do you agree or disagree with my choices? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe and like, please, if you will. And as ever, I really appreciate your following, your support. These videos aren't made for any money reasons. They're made purely as a hobby, and that's the way this channel will always be. I promise you that. Thank you all. All the very best.